What? Oh, okay, perfect. I was sorry. Oh my God, I was too loud. Sorry. Again, good morning, everybody. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, here in the Media Center in Montreal. Also, those who joined us online. Welcome to the press briefing of the European Union at COP15. My name is Ondřej Charvat, and I will be moderator of today short briefing, but we had a limited time, so I will skip to introduce our distinguished guest, Mr. Ladislav Miko, head of the Czech presidency delegation and special envoy of the Czech Republic for the biodiversity issues, and Mr. Hugo Maria Schally from European Commission. Good morning. I will ask the both of the guests at the beginning to provide short remarks, and after them there will be room for your questions. So please, Ladislav, can you start?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, those who are following us from the regions where there is no morning but other part of the day. And thank you for this opportunity. I will start by saying that there is no surprise, I believe, that European Union is here to support adoption of the strong, ambitious, and transformative post-2020 global biodiversity framework. I see that as a very urgent element of what needs to be done. I think that we have a strong feeling of urgency on the one side, but I also want to build it on the clear basis of scientific and monitoring information about the state of the biodiversity, but also taking into account all the experience and lessons learned from the previous decades. You probably know that the biodiversity framework within the European Union is pretty strong, and we have many good but also lessons, experiences from the past developments. All these we would like to use in order to find a solution here, an agreement which will work and deliver, because I think there is no more chance to fail in these endeavors and efforts. We believe that the ambitious and transformative global biodiversity framework is a key step in achieving the vision we have set for 2050. And let me to mention few components or elements of the framework, even if we really believe that we are trying to build a, if you wish, functional house, and all elements are equally important and mutually deeply interconnected. There are still some highlights. First, the set of area-based targets, be it protected areas, land use planning, and restoration issues, and also with regard to effective management of protected areas system, we believe this is particularly important. A number of countries of our region are members of the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, supporting, for example, 30 by 30 target. It is very important to say that we believe, and this is one of our lessons from Europe, if the goals are not set, measurable and clear, and if there is no way how to monitor progress and no indicators, headline indicators, which allow you to check if you are on the right way, right path, it is very difficult then to evaluate at the end of period if you achieved your goals. So these things play together and must be seen as supporting each other. As I mentioned, EU has already done part of its task. You know probably our protected area or system or network of areas called Natura 2000. We are preparing, discussing just actually the nature restoration law, one additional major law element which allows then to work also in non-protected part of the nature. We have farm to fork strategy when we speak about the mainstreaming, so we are also on the way to implement and do it. So we want to mainstream biodiversity, including the reform of harmful subsidies, obviously speaking about sustainable production and consumption. We believe that biodiversity should be prioritized at the state level through the legal instruments. We want to hold biodiversity laws. For that, all sectors require transformation and integration of biodiversity considerations into their daily operations. Sustainable use of biological resources is also a key component to hold biodiversity laws. I was speaking already on monitoring system, and I should not avoid that the same part of the same house which I am speaking about is obviously the mobilization of capacity and resources. The efforts of resource mobilization at the national level should be supplemented through international flows in a timely manner for the implementation of NB-SAPs. And I would like also to highlight that there is not only urgency of having framework, but is also urgency to have all the implementation framework set up in a way which will allow within what we call a decade and what is in fact 8 or 7 years to implement it efficiently. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ladislav, and I will ask Hugo.
Yes, good morning. I lead the EU delegation to COP15, and obviously this is a collective effort of the EU and its member states, and we are collaborating very closely with the presidency of the Council in the Czech delegation led by Ladislav. I wanted to complement and amplify a little bit some of the comments that Ladislav made, in particular with regard to additional elements of the framework. Because apart from the very specific elements that Ladislav already highlighted, there are quite a number of very important priorities that we have in the context of sustainable use of biodiversity. And I think that sustainable use pertains very much to issues related to addressing the direct drivers of biodiversity loss. I think it's very important for us to address issues related to unsustainable agricultural and piscicultural and fisheries practices. And I think that in that context, we will attach great importance to having recognize the importance of switching to agroecology practices. We also, and I think that is going almost a little bit beyond what Balázs mentioned on mainstreaming, we find it very important that we also look at commitments to reduce our environmental footprint globally in that regard, coming from economic operations. And I think it is quite important also to make sure that business practices increasingly take into account biodiversity impacts. And I think the issue related to transparency and reporting by companies in that regard is important, and we are pushing very hard for targets 15 and 16 to press in that direction. Ladislav put a lot of emphasis on the issue of robust implementation and also on means of implementation. And in that regard, we're talking certainly to a degree about mobilizing resources, all sources, but let's not forget in that context that there is a very important element that we need to address, which is the issue of environmentally harmful subsidies that we think is a key issue that also needs to figure explicitly in the framework. But still, I think an issue of mobilizing resources, something that occupies center stage in many discussions. I just want to amplify again the message that Ladislav gave, that the bulk of the financial resources that are necessary for implementing the framework will have to be raised in a domestic context. Because when you look at the overall assessment of financing that we have through different studies, it is clear that only a sort of a minority of them should or will be dealt with in the context of international flows. And in those international flows, international public flows, i.e. ODA, will actually play a minor part. We do recognize that it plays a significant, but it will not make the real difference. We are pushing very hard, working with multilateral development banks, World Bank and others, to make sure that also those institutions play their part in making sure that international flows are generated that can also leverage private investment, which of course will also play an important part, especially with regard to mainstreaming activities in that regard. That having said, that doesn't mean that the EU and the member states don't take their responsibility very serious with regard to keeping to past commitments and trying to match commitments that are commensurate with the level of ambition of the GBF. Let me just remind you that the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, last summer pledged that our biodiversity funding would reach 7 billion by 2025 and that we would sort of keep up that level afterwards. Member states such as France, Germany have made similar commitments. All that together with other donors means that we have collectively reached and surpassed our financial commitments under the Hyderabad, which was for the implementation of the ISHI framework. Just to say, when we make commitments of that kind, we deliver. But we deliver because those commitments were actually realistic. Now, the discussion that we're currently having is based on a variety of different studies that you can believe or not believe, but the demands are with regard to the delivery, but also the deployment on the ground, not realistic. And we certainly need to further discuss what we're going to do. I think in that context, it's also important to underline that we also want in the framework different provisions that ensure that in future public spending, but also private investment is aligned with biodiversity objectives, perhaps applying at a minimum the principle of do no harm in that regard. We are certainly sort of cognizant of the calls for new funds that have been put forward in the context of these negotiations, but it's very clear that we have yet to see what would be the realistic exploitation that new funds would actually lead to new funding, because that's not always the same thing. But we will be open to discuss innovative mechanisms of any kind that might be proposed, but certainly we see no added value in any fund that is based on ODA only. To conclude, I would like to refer to one issue that is also being put very clearly on the table as a key to success, which is the issue of digital sequence information on genetic resources. The EU and its member states have engaged over the years in the processes and the discussion, and we think that we have the elements of an innovative and pragmatic solution, provided that all sides actually treat it as such. And I think that if we can put all those pieces together, there is a fair chance that on the 20th or the 19th of December, we can actually adopt an ambitious and transformative framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ugo. And now the room for questions, please. Yes, please.
Hi, Elisa Serre from Radio Canada. Just wondering, when you say harmful subsidies, is it actually in the text? Because we haven't seen it yet, if we just receive it by email. And if it is there many parties wanting to withdraw these harmful subsidies, and what actually harmful means for you guys?
This is a discussion in the context of Target 18 in that regard. I think that there is certainly on the side of the European Union member states and also some other countries, the willingness to have a clear commitment to redirect and repurpose subsidies that harm the environment. There is quite some pushback from some other delegation. I mean, one of key delegations in that regard is the delegations of Argentina and Brazil that are very worried about either a figure or a push to eliminate or redirect harmful subsidies. I think that's an open discussion, and we will see where that goes. Thank you.
Yes, please. If you maybe use the standby, or okay, please.
Hi, my name's Phoebe Weston from The Guardian. Wondering, you're talking about protected areas. Will the EU be allowing extractive industries like mining and drilling from within the 30 by 30 protected areas? Thank you.
Okay, I was just checking if I understood well the question. Obviously, when we speak about the protection of 30%, we are speaking about protecting it for purpose, and the purpose is to protect the biodiversity. So this is the leading principle. Whatever activity is eventually happening in those areas, it should not harm biodiversity and the functioning of the ecosystem. So it is, let's say, the general principle. But I think that the principal thing is that we are speaking about the areas which are protected from this kind of harmful activities. So.
Thank you. Please, this mic.
Yeah, Gloria Dickey with Reuters. Just to follow up on that, I'm wondering if you can kind of respond more directly to claims that the EU is working to kind of water down language on 30 by 30 with management effectiveness in these protected areas?
Certainly not.
Okay. Okay, second question. I'm just wondering if you could also speak to the role that some of the other countries are playing in negotiations, particularly Brazil, Argentina, and Indonesia, and how you're working with them.
Yeah, we are in this first day of the negotiations of the COP. So, I mean, having experience from the 3 days of OEVG here, I think that we have now quite clear positions expressed, and we are in very close contact. We are really trying to discuss, let's say, the principles which may lead to common agreement at the end. So, I mean, certainly we are trying to find a bridging solutions at this moment. This is most what I can say.
Thank you.
Please, the gentleman here.
Good morning, Jacob Serbin, Canadian Press. In terms of resource mobilization, would it be fair to say that your position is that, broadly speaking, the European Union and its member states are already doing enough, or are there any sort of targets that you'd like to see in terms of actual dollar values?
I will probably leave also Hugo to add on it, but as it was already presented, we committed already, and we don't say that what we already do is completely enough. I mean, we understand that we need to have the space for implementation of the goals which will be adopted here. Obviously, the things are interlinked, but there is a clear understanding that for achieving those goals, we need also to contribute to mobilize necessary capacity and funding. Hugo.
I think that's a tricky question in the context of the negotiations. One thing is obvious, as Ladislav has just said, we're not starting from zero. There are significant activities on the ground ongoing for many years, and we will now step up our activities significantly in the years leading up to 2027. The question is, what would be the added value of a dollar member in Target 19 or Goal D? What will it actually bring to the framework? I think that from our perspective, clearly we see no value in having a target for international public flows, i.e. for ODA in that context. That's clear. But I think it may be of interest to reflect on a value with regard of the overall amount that needs to be mobilized for globally for the implementation. And I think that may actually lead to a further reflection of whether or not it is useful to have a value for international flows. And mark my words, international flows, not international public financing flows. Thank you.
Yes, please.
David Ligui, CFAC Radio Sherbrooke. First question, Canada, yesterday make an offer to make 25% for 25. Are you going to do the same for Europe? And second question about finance flow. Are you going to put an eco tax in Europe or like the 0.1% on finance flow or called tax Tobin? We say that in France, tax Tobin. So you're going to put tax on finance. Okay. And the last one is GM food. Are you going to still ban GM food from Amazonian forest after 2020? No more deforestation for GM food. Thanks.
I will start with the first part. I mean, it's actually quite easy because we don't need to put a target of 25% for 2025 because this is what is already in implementation in Europe. So we have it, in other words. And we are, when speaking about 30 by 2030, we are aware that we have the trajectory to that goal also in Europe. So this is certainly on our agenda, and this is what we are already practically implementing already. Regarding the other two questions, I will pass to my colleague. I will just say that the interpretation of the last question for me is a bit unprecise because it is not about the banning, it is about the regulation which we implement in the European Union regarding the GMs. So it is not a ban. Ban would mean that it is absolutely impossible, but the reality is that we have the legal framework which needs to be followed when speaking about the introduction of GM food on the European markets. So there is no something like general ban.
Well, you effectively answered that question as well. But I think that maybe what the colleague referred to was the recent political agreement on a legislative proposal that the Commission has made with regard to deforestation-free products, which does not cover the area of GM in that sense. So in that sense, the legislation to which Ladidov applied continues to apply. I think that we currently, in the context of the discussion here, we're not discussing a tax on financial products in the EU, but I think those discussions are ongoing. I think that we know that there are proposals on the table at this COP about not a tax but a levy on retail sales on biodiversity-based products. That's an African Union proposal, which we have received, where we find there's still a lot of details missing. So we are not in a position to really assess the implications and the practical operationality of how that would be implemented. But we're certainly ready to listen to more explanations that we might have from the African group on this proposal.
Hi, yes. This is Liu Dong from the paper China. I have a question also related to the financing issue. In order to achieve such ambitious goals, I'm wondering what is EU's position on to mobilizing more resources to support it? Could you elaborate more on that?
We all agree that we need to mobilize additional resources, domestic and international. What we have heard from many of our partners is that they are lacking capacity to establish what are necessary tools in that regard. And Ladislav referred to the national biodiversity strategies and action plans. I would add to that the biodiversity financing plans. And I think that in that context, providing the necessary assistance so that all countries can correctly assess their needs and their the amount of resources that need to be mobilized to implement the global biodiversity framework, in the context of which, again, going back to the question of planning, reporting, and review, they would establish national targets, I think is important. And it's our view that we would need to focus in the first place to make sure that that can happen and can happen quickly. In the context of an implementation effort, of course, then we would actually develop a resource mobilization strategy over time that actually makes sure that the resources flow in the right directions and in the right way. But it is quite important that in all channels, and especially if and when we refer to official development assistance, that countries integrate their biodiversity activities clearly in their national development plans and actually make the necessary requests to their development partners in that regard. That is sometimes not happening today, because very often at the country level, in many countries, biodiversity is not prioritized by the government, and therefore it becomes very difficult for development partners to integrate them into the programming of such activities.
Yeah, perfect. We are almost running of the time, so one short question, one short answer, please.
In terms of genetic digital info, Étienne Leblanc, Radio-Canada, in terms of genetic digital information, how far are you ready to go to share revenues and information? And if you can answer in French, it would be appreciated, if you can.
Je vais essayer. C'est une question de maintenir l'approche de science ouverte, qui est maintenant l'approche qui est utilisée dans le monde académique et dans l'innovation. Et nous sommes ouverts à toute solution qui répond à un nombre de critères que nous avons établis lors de la 3e session du groupe ouvert à composition ouverte à Genève. Et nous sommes ouverts à tout système qui pourrait être à la base d'un partage équitable des avantages dérivant de l'utilisation des ressources génétiques et le cas échéant de l'information digitale. Mais nous notons que nous avons toujours des partenaires qui insistent d'intégrer aussi cette forme d'information génétique dans le système bilatéral qui a été établi sous le protocole de Montréal. Et il est notre position que c'est un système qui ne marche pas avec la manière d'utiliser l'information digitale. Alors, il y a plusieurs approches sur la table, mais il nous paraît qu'une approche multilatérale est l'approche appropriée. Mais là, on est encore dans une étape, dans un stage de réflexion et analyse des différentes options. Et nous espérons que lors de cette COP, on va pouvoir réduire le nombre des options sur la table et peut-être établir un processus pour définir des modalités d'une approche qui pourrait, lors d'une future COP, mener à une décision sur un système qui pourra permettre d'avancer sur le partage de bénéfices. J'espère que c'est ce que vous aviez entendu, mais je crois qu'il y a encore des désaccords profonds entre les différents partenaires sur les différents éléments que j'ai décrits. Merci.
So thank you very much. Our time is almost out. So thank you again, and see you in the next press briefing of the European Union. Have a good day.